Thank you very much, Ilya, and thank you very much for everybody for coming, and thank you very much for this place where we have actually started our projects for documentation of extant synagogues in Latvia to late mailers and others who all along our way to this presentation helped us enormously. I should also thank to the Dutch foundations that sponsored our expeditions and the Israeli Academy that made this project in general possible, as well as the Erasmus mobility program that made possible my coming today to Latvia. So, the problem of writing this book is challenging. It is a big problem because of poor preservation of once very rich heritage, Jewish built heritage that existed in Latvia. About 10% of whatever existed survives in different states of preservation. That's why we couldn't build our book just on what has been preserved, but to go deeper and to use iconographical, photographic, verbal material, archival documents and newspaper publications to produce a coherent narrative which we believe belongs or should belong to a grander narrative, to a grand narrative of Jewish architecture, though we do not know whether such an architecture exists, but probably we cannot know this or give a negative answer unless we study the very phenomenon. So, for these ends, for the ends of our book, we have to study the Latvian architecture to put the synagogue architecture of Latvia in proper local or countries or provinces context, but also we couldn't analyze whatever we see in synagogue architecture without including it in a broader Jewish context of architecture of synagogues throughout Europe and even the entire world if we are talking about the interwar period. That's why the book is built like that. It starts with survey of brief survey of Latvian history, of Jewish history in Latvia and Latvian architecture. And then we start chapter by chapter discussing particular topics of synagogue architecture we found in Latvia. So let's miss the long historical and architectural historical introductions because you know much better what is architecture of Latvia and also probably history of Latvia and history of Jewish people in Latvia. We will jump to the matter, and of course you know that Latvia is a composed country consisting of several very diverse historical regions, and that's why our survey, our book, our sketches, architectural historical sketches, are also dedicated to particular regions. And then we try to say a few words about synagogue architecture of Latvia as an integral entity. So it is a new idea actually to start with wooden synagogues in Latgalia, because the oldest preserved synagogue in Latvia is in Latgalia. It is in Ludza, great synagogue in Ludza. When we came for the first time to document it, it looked like that. You know very well this edifice. It was clad with bricks, a very clever decision of of the 1930s, because the town suffered of very severe fires, and this cladding protected a wooden log structure. We couldn't know that. We couldn't know that because we were not allowed to break those bricks or make some sondage or just dig somewhere or whatever. We couldn't have a hammer, just we had our tools as architects and architectural historians, and we couldn't know that this brick shell includes a wooden log construction, which was possible to date by the means of dendrology to around 1800 when it was built. So the trees were cut some 30 years previously. And the restorers, the conservators, who could do the proper physical work, they have arrived to these wonderful results when the synagogue was restored, returned to Jewish and general public, and rededicated as a synagogue. We could only produce measured drawings, and what we see from those measured drawings is very interesting to us, because this prayer hall inside this log house has a cupola. It's almost a pyramid actually, but it is a cupola, which is hidden inside the roof construction. For Ludza or for Latvia, it might be pretty rare, but such a construction is popular in Central Eastern Europe since the 18th century. A classical example of such a synagogue is a synagogue in Hvizdec, Ukrainian, Gvozdzic in Polish, which was built in 1640s, but reconstructed in 1725 to 1729. And the researcher, Alois Breyer, who was there before the synagogue burned during the First World War, he noticed that the roof construction was cut through with this very, very intricate dome to make the interior space higher, though not to breach the roof and not to expose it, I mean the dome on the exterior. So it was a very, very interesting construction, and built of smoothly sawn logs and boards. It was meticulously painted. And the iconography of these paintings give us an image of the celestial sphere. You can see here signs of zodiac painted in the cupola that show that this is actually the rakia in Hebrew, the sky where the stars and planets are moving. So the art historian Thomas Hupka, who analyzed this synagogue and produced a very interesting book, which also already has a second edition, he supposed that this architecture emerged under the influence of Lurian Kabbalah, penetrating to those lands which are in the southeast of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth from Ottoman Empire, with manuscripts, with new for the Ashkenazi Jews Lurianic prayers. It was long before the spread of Hasidism, but still it was a very noticeable phenomenon. How do we know that it was noticeable? Because of the new prayers that were inscribed on the walls of synagogues, because people still couldn't have printed prayer books, and the manuscripts were very expensive. This is a very spectacular case, and you know there is a 80% copy of this fantastic ceiling in the Museum of Jewish History of Poland, Polin, in Warsaw. And it was the first step, which we know, towards producing such domed spaces in wooden synagogues. But it became widespread in those lands, in today Galicia, let's say, not today, the Austrian Galicia, today West Ukraine, but the shapes of the domes, they changed through the time, and let's say this synagogue in Smotrich in 18th century was actually a dome and not a tent, like, it wasn't tent like in Gvozdets, but the motifs and the subjects of the murals, of the paintings were the same, and the school was mostly the same, spreading to the west, to the north, and even arriving to Bavaria, to Germany, with the itinerant painters. And it moved certainly to the north, to the territory of Belarusia of today. Here we have a cupola in Mogilev on the Dnieper synagogue, decorated in 1740s. And this way, we believe it also arrived to Latgalia. It was one phenomenon which we cannot but understand. We cannot understand without a wider, broader Jewish context. And another synagogue that is preserved and pretty early synagogue is Beit Midrash in Rezekne, the green new Beit Midrash in Rezekne, built in 1845. It doesn't have any cupola, but what is very interesting and very intricate and parallel to Ludza, it has a very specific shape of the bima. It is an octagonal bima with stairs for climbing the bima and going down after the reading of the Torah chapter, on diagonals from south-north to from northwest to southwest, not on the transverse axis of the synagogue, of the prayer hall, but rather from the rear side of the bima. And interestingly, we have a large number of such bimot, we say in Hebrew, bima in plural, and we tried to find the oldest example of such a bima, and we came across such a project for a great Mitnagdim synagogue in Poland. Mitnagdim meaning that it's not Hasidic, it is for Jews that were praying in Ashkenazi traditional rite, and it is 1872 by certain Joachim Brave, who was a surveyor. We know who was he because of the story of his son, who was sent exiled to Siberia for breaking his oath as a surveyor. It is quite an interesting example because we see this surveyor as a knowledgeable person who knows examples of synagogue construction, including, say, the great synagogue of Vilnius, because the shape of the platform in front of the Torah ark has also diagonal steps as it is in Vilnius. And the three synagogues, or Raisische Minyonim, that were in the Moscow Vorstadt of Riga, also had this arrangement in each of the prayer halls. Though it is a Hasidic synagogue, all three of them were Chabad synagogues, but they have this diagonal stairs uniformly everywhere. in every hall. And there are many more synagogues like that, which are preserved in drawings, like after synagogue in Daugavpils. You see, there is no cupola, and the bima has 8 posts on its corners, and it arrives to the ceiling and supports the ceiling, the beams of the ceiling. Another synagogue in Daugavpils, Kupečeska Merchants Synagogue in Daugavpils. These were designed by Johann Thalberg, who served as the city architect at that time in Daugavpils. It's a very, very similar solution. And another one at Odeskaya Street in Daugavpils, very, very same. And these are photographs of such interiors, but here there are no posts on the corners of the bima, just as we have in Ludza and Rezekne. The bima is octagonal with diagonal stairs. And you see here it is a Chabad synagogue, once again a Hasidic synagogue, and this is an Ashkenazi, meaning mitnagdik, meaning people who do not share the beliefs of and the right of the Hasidim, and the same layout of the bima. When I have put this bimot that I have discovered through archival research and also in situ, I've received such a picture that we have the most concentration of these plans of such a layout in Latgalia or in the former Vitebsk gubernia, governorate. And there are several examples beyond that region, also 3 in Riga, as we know in the Raisische Minionim, also 2 in Lithuania. And the outmost southern example is in Volhynia, in northern Ukraine, northwestern Ukraine, in Kovel. Here you can see a photograph by Austrian troops during the First World War, people standing on such a bima, and there are memories of people who survived from Kovel who remember that bima and cannot explain why it was so strange. Neither know we why was it like that. The idea behind such a bima could be some inventive thought in that Orthodox milieu, meaning both Ashkenazi and Hasidic. The people first invented a very efficient plan, because such steps, they do not steal, they do not use place in the aisles, aisles between the rows of the benches, of the pews. And second, it is in the center of the hall. It's still in the center of the hall, as is prescribed by halacha in that vast region of Europe since the 16th century by Remuz, glossa to Shulchan Aruch. That bima should be in the center. Why is it important to those Orthodox people? Because they are not accepting the progressive or choral rite, where the bima is shifted to the east and united in one special unit with Aron Kodesh. And we have several examples in Kurzeme mostly, when the Jews, the Orthodox conservative Jews, are insisting on central bima to the level of quarrels inside a community and reconstructions which come to some compromise, actually moving the bima back to the center. And as I've said, the pattern could be borrowed from the great synagogue of Vilna, where the stairs to the Torah Ark are on diagonal, and of course the bima is central, and it is placed in the midst of 4 central columns, piers. Such a solution is impossible with octagonal bima with the stairs on diagonal, because to enter such a bima you have to raise a column. But that's why in this new scheme, with 4 piers, 4 wooden posts on octagonal bima, you can arrive to the ceiling and support some beams and have an absolutely new, very novel solution, meaning that the Orthodox and conservative world also was inventive in those years, and there is no such a thing as one and single tradition, and we just stick to it. And because those Jews didn't stick to one and single tradition. Now let's jump to another side of today's Latvia, to Kurland, Kurzeme. It's also very interesting because the development of synagogue architecture there is absolutely different, and the Jews were different. They were mostly German acculturated and were involved in the circle of German culture and German thought and German architecture. It's very important that the civic governor of Kurland, a member of the art academies in Berlin and Bologna, Baron Heinrich von Offenberg, was a knowledgeable person, and his tastes and his thought, his ideas were followed by the German and Danish architects that worked in Kurland and who could imbue the image of that capital of Kurland with this explicitly neoclassicist flavor. And we know about at least 2 synagogues that were inside the fortified perimeter of Jelgava, Mitava. One is Borkum synagogue, which is older, number 1, and the second one is a communal synagogue. So let's start with the communal synagogue. Now we know its story much better than before, because I found and read the memory book, a manuscript which is preserved at the National University of Jerusalem, of Israel, and there we have memories that explain how the Jews settled on this bank of Drixe River. There was a nobleman's manor which was purchased by the community as such, because the nobleman wanted to get rid of it, and it was a building with 2 wings facing the embankment. So the Jews reconstructed it into a synagogue. You see there in the left corner, in the circle I show, we can see these eastern wings facing the embankment and the hipped roof of the synagogue. But through time it became dilapidated, and in 1850s it still was in use, but then it was just razed because it was unsafe. Another synagogue that was on the southern side of Jelgava, Mitava, is Borkum's synagogue on Teichgasse, as it was called there. But then in 1864, it was reconstructed by Samuel Friedrich, and it's called since then not Borkum's but Friedrich's synagogue. And there are 2 photographs. On the exterior, it's a very simple log house, I believe, but in the interior, it is the so-called Baroque survival composition. That is Baroque art of decorating, of producing, carving Torah arcs, survives for half a century further on, but the decorative motifs that we can see here, like a peacock above, you see the peacock's tail and wings atop the Torah ark, are very modern and very new in this synagogue art. Also, we can see, I may say, a vainglory of the founder, because we see here two round windows with stained glass, and the right one bears letter Shin, which stands for his name Shmuel, Samuel, and the left one bears letter Pei, that is Friedrich. So he was very proud, and actually he reconstructed the synagogue in a year after his wife's death, but he started in 1864 with a bima attached to Aron Kodesh, because as it is written in the period's newspaper, he got possessed with modern ideas, but the local flock and the local rabbis, particularly the Lithuanian rabbis, disliked that, and they persuaded him to reconstruct the synagogue in 1875 in such a way that the bima would be shifted back to the center of the hall, and he vowed not to return to his mistakes, to preserve, to never change this traditional layout with a bima in the center. We cannot see here the bima, but please believe me, there are newspaper publications. Another synagogue in Kurzeme, in Kurland, of that period is in Bauska. This is a neoclassicist building which was built during the Theodor Gottfried Schulz tenure, but probably under his supervision, but we do not have any evidence that he designed or he built that, though he is the person who gave that, largely gave that neoclassicist outlook to the main spaces, public spaces of Jelgava. Here we can see this neoclassicist gable, and on other photographs we see a Palladian window on another facade. But inside it features a Baroque survival Torah ark by its eastern wall. And we know from records of local memories that it was produced by certain master Shabtai, who produced a similar Torah ark somewhere in Poland, and he worked on it 3 years. He was an illiterate master working for some very miserable fees, and he didn't leave his name on the ark, unlike the artist who painted the cupola and left his name in the cupola. And that was just a very traditional behavior, ethos of a carver, because it's not very comely in Judaism to produce graven images, to produce sculptures. We have legends somewhere in Central Eastern Europe that a thunderbolt destroys the name of the carver who dared to engrave it.
Just to interrupt, I would encourage everybody to turn around and to look back at the replica, one fragment of the Torah ark, so you can imagine how it looked in its full glory.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, it's a very good point, and it's exactly that ark. It's exactly that arc. So what we can see here in other of synagogues of Kurland, like this in Piltene, that they use neoclassicist motifs like Palladian window or thermal window on the left half gable. And it is combined also with Gothic survival or Romanticism that is using these pointed arches and pointed openings. And then neoclassicism in Kurland, Kurzeme, develops in such a direction that such a Palladian window, such a motif of large segmental window, falls in 4 parts. 2 triangles by the sides of the central portion with 2 windows in the center. And these 2 windows are an allusion to the tablets of the law, which are implicit here. These are not tablets, these are just how to say, a remes, an allusion to such iconography which becomes popular in the 19th century. It is not accepted in Judaism to place the tablets of the law, the Decalogue, on the exterior. Even in interior, it's not accepted before the 18th, 19th century. Another synagogue of that type, oh no, sorry, it's the same synagogue, simply it's my photograph of 2009, and I was able to enter. What is specific here? That the entire space, meaning the ceiling above both the prayer hall and the women's section on the west, is spanned with 1 barrel vault, and it is painted with a starry sky, as it was on the photographs of Bauska. And here we have also a similar composition in Auce, built later, and here we can see that it is just something on the upper story of a building that looks like a very common dwelling house. It looks very, very modest on the street. And yet another example of neoclassicism, something built around 1862, the Great Synagogue in Aispute. This western facade, which we see here on the right, is blocked with later brickwork because it is entered from the left side building, which is Beit Midrash and was built later. But what is interesting for us is a very even division of this facade. In our case, it is the northern facade. You cannot understand the interior division of the space inside the synagogue, though it is subdivided into the vestibule and women's area and the prayer hall. Why is it so? Because it is neoclassicism, which demands from the edifice, from the building, to look uniform. All the openings to be spread evenly. And here the order that imposes an architect on the exterior is overriding the logics, the liturgical logics of the interior. You shouldn't pay attention to these exit doors of the club, but believe me, the connector on the left is built much later and has nothing to do with the old synagogue, with the Great Synagogue as such. And in the interior, it still has that wooden vault that spans the entire space. This is above the scene of the club, House of Culture, and I was able to climb there with some stairs and photograph. And here on the left we can see an historical photograph today this window is concealed in the ceiling, in the attic space of the connector between the synagogue and Beit Midrash, but it is still visible in the attic space. This is yet another synagogue where we do not have a thermal Palladian window, but we have a series of 3 roundels with Magenei David, with stars of David. And in the interior, in two columns, there was a row of columns, but now they have been replaced with these slanting posts just to enable transformation of this huge prayer hall into a basketball ground. Yet another example is a synagogue in Sabile, where we can see on the eastern facade on the left a central niche of the eastern facade. And we know that there should be a Torah ark inside on this place. But on the exterior, we have a neo-Renaissance composition of Serlian triple windows, where the central one is transformed into niche to somehow allow for the interior position of the Torah ark. So we cannot see the entire northern facade from here, but it doesn't emphasize the division of interior space into the vestibule and the prayer hall. Why? Because it is still under the influence of neoclassicism. And another example with very vague date. I believe that we together with Ilya are marching towards a more precise date, but you can see in the attic space above the old, above a new ceiling, an old construction of the roof and a trace of old barrel wooden vault, which also spans the entire space above the prayer hall and the vestibule. So we can conclude that neoclassicism was a lasting stream in the synagogue architecture of Kurland. And it was a universal style, not particularly Jewish, but it manifested inclusion, Jewish inclusion in general culture and in general urban space. It was ambivalent to the needs, religious needs and organization of the interior space, but that was the decision of the architect and of the community. And notwithstanding, the Torah arcs in several synagogues, as we have seen, were neo-Baroque, and they followed the traditional craftsmanship of producing Torah arcs. Also, it is interesting that the synagogues are spanned with wooden vaults, not with the masonry ones, and it makes them similar to the Dutch synagogues. I believe that there was no direct connection between the synagogues of Holland and synagogues of Kurzeme, though there were some traces of people moving to Kurzeme from Holland, but probably poor geological conditions, both in Holland and in Latvia, caused these very light wooden constructions because the walls could not be built thick enough to bear the thrust of stone vaults. So let's go on. And of course about those paintings, the interior paintings, they are not similar, as we have seen, to the rest of the area, let's say to the south, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, where we can discern a very distinct school and iconography of painting. These paintings of these skies, starry sky and clouds and moon some time and sun, they are closer to paintings in the churches in local churches, but much more investigation should be done to produce some conclusion. Now, let's speak about synagogues of Riga and about the German expression. This German expression, as I call it, was based on the pattern, on an exemplary design for the synagogue in Kassel, Hesse, in Germany. This is a very, very known pattern and very known design because it was published in Allgemeine Bauzeitung in Vienna and became popular across European countries. And what is interesting here, that the Jewish newspaper of that period said it's a very fair combination of the Byzantine exterior, meaning round arches, Rundbogen architecture, with the Roman basilica inside. You may believe me that there are central nave and side aisles inside, but it's a construct. It's actually a construct which helped the Jews of Kassel, Hesse, and further in Germany to identify themselves as loyal German citizens. They rejected Egyptian-style synagogue before this version, and a neoclassicist version, and they wanted to be presented in German architectural vocabulary, but also to show that they are an element connecting East and West, Orient and Occident in a broader cultural context. So, in Riga we have several examples of use of this scheme, though this use is never pure. For instance, the Great Choral Synagogue in Riga in general follows this composition of a basilica, and it has round Rundbogen, round arched motifs. But in contemporary press, it is called a Renaissance-styled building. Why? Why, indeed? Because it quotes from the Scuola Grande di San Marco in Venice. And the architects, they shouldn't go to Venice to see it, though it was popular through engravings, but also it was applied to the Schloss Schwerin by outstanding German architects like August Stüler. It's one of those who designed the Oranienburger Straße synagogue after Knobler in Berlin. So these are very, very popular patterns that made Venetian Renaissance popular throughout Europe and German-speaking lands in particular. But also Renaissance has a very special symbolic meaning. It means also a revival of urban life and decency of the patricians class. Look at the National Bank of Riga, or the Stock Exchange of Riga. It uses the same neo-Renaissance language, style, for similar ends, to show the bourgeoisie as a decent new class that harks back to the values of the cities republics of Italy. Here is the design by Paul Hartenach of the Gogol Schule and the final rendition of that building. And we know that, you see, there is a small apse on the east of the original design with a staircase to the singers' choir. Finally, it wasn't built, and the singers, the choir, stood in front of the Torah ark, but the bima has never been shifted to the Torah Ark. It remained as it is in the original design in the center. Though it was a choral ride, it was a kind of reform architecture, but it was a compromise between the Jews that felt themselves reform, progressive, German and cultured, and the general Jewish community that gathered in this space. Here we can see this central bima with the chorus, with the cantorial chorus. Another synagogue was the Belarusian synagogue in Riga, one that we have seen the plan in the previous chapter of the book, with the octagonal bima with diagonal stairs. So on the street it looked pretty German, let's say. In design it even had some features of Moorish style, but in its final rendition it was more close to the Rundbogen pattern, to the pattern of Hesse, of Kassel, though it didn't repeat it precisely, but this raking arched belts and horizontal arched belt beneath the cornice are actually so-called Lombardian belts, which show the connection to Italy and also to Germany. And here is a rare photograph that I know, and I'm thankful to Ilya, that was purchased by the Jewish Museum, which shows that synagogue, those Rassische Minionen burning, and thus we see that this final design by Victor Grabe, was carried out. And here is the plan, which we have previously discussed, just to remind you what is. Another synagogue was the Moskova Street Synagogue in Riga, that was designed by Reinhold Schmeling in 1889. It's also Rundbogen, though the upper part of the street facade is a little bit different than it was in Kassel, and actually it is pretty decorative. Why? Because it's three-dimensional and it is not very much functional. Look, it is here at the bottom of the drawing. The building is facing the street with its bottom part. So, according to halakha, to the Jewish law, the people attending a synagogue have to enter the prayer hall or the synagogue from the side opposite to the direction of prayer. So they have to, in our case, have to enter from the left, from the west. So these stairs, the staircase which faced the street, now it is not existent, I believe it has been ruined, it served for climbing the women's galleries and an extra exit from the prayer hall. In those years, designers and communities and governments started paying very keen attention at evacuation routes from the synagogue spaces, because it happened, because very tragic events that we do not know where they happened, but they were, and the authorities urged the communities to open additional doors and make the emergency exits in every place where possible. And so we can also see a division between a large hall and the small synagogue, which had no Torah ark. It was brought from the large prayer hall to the small one on the northern, the upper part of the synagogue on the weekdays. So let's go on. And another one, the Stabu Street Synagogue in Riga, which also was designed in this Rundbogen style. And these gables are also alluding to the great Gogol synagogue in a way. And here you can see a lot of entrances and additional vestibules that make this huge hall, which is designed for more than 200 praying people, to allow them exiting very, very efficiently. And the same style, similar style, is the burial house at the Old Jewish Center in Riga by Paul Mandelstam. It's 1905, but it's still conservative, though it is, it is an auxiliary building, and it is still in a style which is complementary to the German cultural environment. And this style is also used in wooden architecture in this building that was allowed as a Jewish canteen in Maiori, but was used as a synagogue, at least definitely in the interwar period. And this facade that was then reconstructed into the market hall was blind in the center, was blocked in the center, and the Torah ark stood in front of this facade facing the Tserenu Street. But unlike this, some synagogues didn't follow this Rundbogen Germanic flavor, expression, and this concerns the Soldiers' Synagogue in Riga, which is neoclassicist still when it was designed and then redesigned in 1913. It has round-headed windows and arches, but it doesn't have this very specific Lombardian arched belts. And this flock, this community also was somehow maybe not proud, but they preserved their memories of their service in the Russian army, and they preserved these small Torah scrolls that they used during their army service, and they preferred Russian-speaking rabbis instead of German-speaking, and so forth. I believe that this neoclassicist architecture that harks back to the early 19th century in Russia, it actually vanished during the reign of Nicholas I, because it was considered, neoclassicism was considered too European, too Occidental, too Freemasonry, if you wish. But this group of soldiers preserved it. So let's go on and see what was Rundbogen doing beyond Riga. Here we see two synagogues of Jelgava that were built on the embankment of Driksa River. Both were built under the auspices of Solomon Pucher in 1868, and a new synagogue in 1877. For some reason, these two synagogues are mixed up together in the book, very, very revered book by Rita Bogdanova and Barkan, but they as if do not see that great synagogue which is standing in this photograph to the right of the small and the new one. It was a Rundbogen structure built under Solomon Pucher, and it has a skylight, a glass skylight on its rooftop. And you can see these arched belts. It is not the same motif as it is in Kassel, but we have such examples with horizontal termination of the facades in Berlin, in many, many places. So here on a postcard, German postcard, taken from the Holy Trinity bell tower, we can see precisely the difference between these two buildings. But and here you can see the side facade, which is discernible in this drawing on 1927. However, Rabbi Pucher, who was the crown rabbi of Mitava, Jelgava, and of Kurland, he wasn't satisfied with that building. He said that if one walks through the streets of Jelgava, he cannot differentiate between this building and every dwelling building. Its windows are like regular windows, though it has these arches. And what is most important, it is not comfortable because it is cold. And people who are adjusted to comfort in their homes are not daring to go into wind, into rain, into snow, and to come then to a cold synagogue and then to pray. You would demand too much of them if you will demand to visit synagogue on everyday basis. And I'll show you what happened further on in Jelgava. This is another synagogue in Kuldiga, which was built a little bit later than the old synagogue in Jelgava, and it close follows the castle pattern, and we can see in the interior that it is an Orthodox synagogue because the bima is standing in the center of the prayer hall, and the women's galleries have, beside the barriers, they have trellis above, some addition to make women invisible from below. So it is very modest interior. And yet another Rundbogen Beit Midrash in Aispute. You see it is standing to the east of the great synagogue that we have discussed previously. Later, these two buildings were combined. Yet another synagogue in Saldus, 1879, with a very steep gable, and probably it reflects the harsh climate of Latvia because it is not a classical slope, and in Kassel, of course, we have much smoother slope and much quieter. And what is interesting that inside we have a very rare photograph of the Torah Ark, and it is a neoclassicist Torah Ark. That is, it belongs to, say, mid-19th century in his stylistics, and it is very similar to several Torah Arks that have been produced in central Poland. And we know them, for instance, from Łąck, and also from drawing by Józef Budko, a Jewish artist who made it popular, and you still probably can buy a copy of such a drawing on some auctions. How did the person able of producing such a Torah Ark arrived to Saldus? I do not know. Neither I know his name, but the visual means of this ark tells that it is not a local construction or decorative law. It's something borrowed from other place. And synagogue in Smiltene, which was built in 1939, is a very late example of Rundbogen, though here this Lombardian belts and these pilasters are not plastered, not articulated, but, well, they simply had no time to finalize this. And these Rundbogen, round arches, were used also in Latgalia, in Daugavpils, but here we have an admixture of Neo-Renaissance, such elements that come from Florence, from Florentine Renaissance, and they are mixed with Lombardian arched belts. Here we can see them beneath the main cornice. Also in Great Choral Synagogue, and here we have even more Neo-Renaissance features which are mixed with the Rundbogen style. Also another synagogue in that same area, in the central area of Daugavpils, that once was a new city after 1840, when the city moved from the new built fortress to the south, I believe, leaving the esplanade free of masonry building. So I believe I have told what I desired. So Rundbogen was enriched with other styles to show, and these round arches just helped to include these Renaissance details or Romanesque details or Gothic details of Florentine or Venetian origins to produce some homogeneous architectural image which somehow reflected the identity, collective identity of the local community, as also proposed by the employed architect. Now, Moorish revival is a later phenomenon, and it derives from Germany, from Bavaria. But actually, in Jewish thought, Moorish style was connected with some mythic golden age in medieval space. It was due to Jewish historians and intellectuals that believed that in medieval Spain, the Jews constituted a very decent part of the general society, which was mostly Muslim, but they were ministers and the poetry and culture flourished, and their language of prayer was Sephardic Hebrew and not the spoiled Ashkenazis. And that's why their prayer books were written and published in Sephardic vowels and diacritics, and pronounced accordingly. And from here comes this, also from this comes this notion of Ostjuden who speak spoiled language and who pray in spoiled language. This idea was reflected also in architecture, and it started with synagogue in Bavarian Ingenheim, and it was proposed by the Bavarian king, Leopold I, who believed that there is a connection between ancient Greece and Germany, Bavaria. He produced a very sophisticated theory. His son became king of Greece, and so on. He believed that Byzantine style of Constantinople was brought there by Constantine the Great from Bavaria. And it's his task, King Leopold's task, to bring it back to Germany, to Bavaria. Then everybody will be happy, and particularly the Jews, because he believed that Byzantine style became Moorish style in the places where Arabs conquered the Byzantine. He never had been there. His knowledge was based on knowledge of Italian architecture at best. But it is we know that it is a construct, but it influenced the beginnings of Moorish revival in Europe, particularly in synagogue architecture. But there were other sources for this Moorish revival. For instance, Ludwig von Förster, a Viennese architect, he designed Baron Adolf Pereira's villa on the bank of Danube, and he designed it in Moorish style to emphasize the Sephardic roots of the climate. But then in the 1850s, that Moorish style became applicable to the synagogues designed by the same Förster in Vienna, Leopoldstadt, and in Budapest. And it was also applied to the Oranienburger Straße in Berlin, from where it spread everywhere in Germany and also in Russian Empire, because the St. Petersburg synagogue, Great Choral Synagogue, was modeled on this. And it was Stasov's idea, it was the Tsar's idea, and so on and so forth. But in Kurland, it was applied, and in Lithuania it was applied prior to its use in St. Petersburg. For instance, this is a Oholyakov synagogue in Kaunas, which has a Torah ark that repeats the Torah ark in Berlin. But on the exterior, this Moorish style is softened by means of Neo-Baroque. And the synagogue of Liepaja was definitely modeled on this Kaunas synagogue. And here we can see the rabbinical chorus standing on the podium in front of the bima connected with the Torah ark. And it produced a great contrast with the cityscape, and this was exactly the idea that Jews loved. They'd like to be differentiated, to show their presence in the cityscape. And this is a new synagogue that was built by under the same Shlomo Solomon Pucher on the bank of Drikse River in Jelgava. This is on what we see on the left. It is a new and warm synagogue. You remember that I told that it wasn't convenient. It was not fair to invite people from their warm houses with waxed floors to come to a cold space and to pray. So he decided to build this new synagogue, and we can see how it occupies a very decent place in cityscape of Jelgava. It's lower, this cupola even lower than the neighboring houses, and this was the law actually, but it is decorated, it is topped with a Star of David, and that involved much discussion, let's say, because conservative Jews said we shouldn't have a Star of David on exterior. As a famous poet, Gordon, Yudeleb Gordon, said, the Moorish style and the Star of David are as mandatory as old Arabic language in our today life. It's not in the place. But nevertheless, Pucher knew how to insist on his design, and he maneuvered out his conservative counterparts and built that synagogue as he wanted, with the support of the governor. And Ovchinsky, with a great disappointment, mentions this in his book. So here we see the same synagogue from other side, from the midtown, and this greenery that we can see nearby in front of both synagogues is the courtyard of two Jelgava synagogues, and this is a view from the embankment, and this is definitely a Moorish style, and it has a cupola, and it has a Star of David, but unlike in Berlin, it has this cupola on its eastern facade, not on western facade, because the view of embankment in front of the castle across the two rivers is very important to show the Jewish presence in the cityscape. And we can see that here the shapes of the windows are harmonious with the Rundbogen. They are horseshoe shaped, and it is shaped close to the Rundbogen, but also making the entire impression of the building more oriental. So I've told what I wanted to tell, and let's move to Riga and to the Petovas Shul. It has its own Jewish context. It falls out somehow from Riga's context. It is very accepted in Riga to put whatever was built in the early 20th century into the scope of Art Nouveau or Jugendstil, but the sources are iconographical rather than stylistics. This is a design which was proposed by Polish-Austrian architect Julian Zacharewicz von Lwigrod. He was also a noble, for the progressive temple in Lemberg, Lviv, of today. But the community rejected this design. They loved this neoclassicist design of 1846, and they didn't want to change them. And as it is written in the memorial book, for fortunate coincidence, there was no money to implement this design. But the architect was insulted with this rejection. He was a rector of the Polytechnicum and dean of the architectural department where I've studied. And he published this design in Czasopismo Techniczne, in the technical magazine of the Polytechnic, and became well known. So the design was built actually on the iconography of reconstruction of the Temple of Solomon. It was a theoretical reconstruction, actually not of the Temple of Solomon, but on the temple of the vision of Ezekiel. That is, it bore a messianic meaning, because only the image of Ezekiel is allowed to be the third temple, let's say, is supposed to be the pattern for the third temple, the future and the ultimate temple. It is based on multiple, this iconography is based on multiple sources. Chipien Perrault, who invented it, they took elements from Egypt because they believed it was one circle of culture, and Phoenicians who built the temple, King Hiram, Phoenicians were very movable. They were able to reach Egypt and see the Egyptian architecture. They also knew the Assyrian architecture, and they had also their own patterns. What are the patterns? And it is a Phoenician sarcophagus in El Awamid. It's southern Lebanon, and here we can see such a composition of a sarcophagus lid, which has horns like an altar, and a small altar, a sacrifice incense altar that is attached to the front wall of the sarcophagus. So this iconography and this idea of Zacharewicz became very popular. This is synagogue, Shara Shamayim synagogue in Cairo, built by mostly by Czech architect Edward Matasek, who worked in a company which worked also in Lvov, in Helmer and Fellner's famous company. So, but here the design and iconography is imbued with more Egyptian symbols and iconic elements than in other places, because it is Egypt, and the Jews of Cairo, very rich Sephardim, they pretended they are living here in Cairo from time immemorial, and it was very, very important to them to show themselves in this space. It's another example built in Moravia, in Hradec Králové, and these two examples preceded actually the design of Pejtova's synagogue. Both examples could be known to Neumann and Zöberlich because there were postcards of these synagogues circulated all around. So this is our Riga's synagogue. And what is important, there is a publication on 1903 that explains the matter, the meaning of the synagogue. It's a synagogue for and of the Jews that live in the old city. all of them mentioned in the plaque, in the vestibule, lived in the old city. One of them, Michelson, moved to the industrial area during the construction, but doesn't matter. And it is stated, it is precisely stated that we should expose ourselves in a civic way, civilized way, as a group that is coming into a milieu, into a space, urban space, where we have never been allowed to settle, unlike in a Pale of Settlement. So this was the programmatic idea behind building this synagogue. And it is an elegant building in the navel of the city, which will be an honor and glory to our congregation and the founders board. So they built it, Davka, as the Jews said, they built it to show their Jewish presence. And we have in other texts, in memories, particularly by Max Michelson, the grandson of the founder, that religion was not seen as something important in our circle, but we were seen and we saw ourselves as a particular ethnic groups, and other groups saw us as such, and we wanted to present ourselves in very, very distinct way. So this is the list of sponsors, of donors, where they lived, and according to this plaque. So it was designed in such a way that women's gallery could be only on the rear side and on the north side of the synagogue, and in the course of construction, the galleries, as you know, were built on all three sides of the prayer hall. And the governor didn't want to allow, the authorities disliked this breach of condition for the construction, and that's why the inauguration of the synagogue was postponed. There is a legend that was repeated in the newspaper «Сегодня» or «Сегодня вечером» that says that the governor was instructed that if you want us to take part in revolutionary activity, you may not allow us the synagogue, but it would be better for everybody if we will pray and not take part in any activities of this sort. So the governor said, so, well, pray. You pray. But this wasn't the point. You know, they couldn't know in 1903 that there will be a revolution in 1905, and it is very typical for any synagogue, for every community, that the synagogue is built and designed for the youth, for due religious education of the youth. And here, this wording doesn't stand out of any other similar formulation. And this is a publication from Yiddish Builder, where it is has a wrong caption that it is Gogolschul, but it is not a Gogolschul. It is a design for the Peitov street, but the surrounding is bucolic, and you know, there was no such a environment in this place. But from this we may consider that it is an advertising, that this drawing is something prepared to forward the design and maybe to sell places. So the design has several iconographic sources beside Chipier and Perrault, what I have shown you previously with this Egyptian two pillars, two pylons on the main facade. These are 19th century very, very known examples of graphical reconstruction of the Temple of Solomon, where the central mass of the temple protrudes forward, and it has here these two columns of Yechin and Boaz as described in the book of Kings. So another source is that sarcophagus, this Phoenician sarcophagus, and that's why probably this facade and this built mass has a central avant-corpse, central protrusion on the western facade, and not two pylons as it was designed by Zakharevich and supposed by Perrault and Chipier. So probably this entrance is epitomizes the sacrificial altar in front of the Phoenician sarcophagus. So there are some other motifs, Assyrian motifs, that are not in other synagogues of this series. For instance, the rosettes, Assyrian rosettes, and this spiral ornament, and architects are using it broadly. What is interesting that they used a lot of blue color. Why blue color? Because Chipier is explicit that lapis lazuli is a color very popular in Babylonian, Assyrian art, because the mineral is brought there from Caucasus area, and it is a very, very typical Assyrian color, also in ceramics and in paintings. And what should be done to use it in paintings? So I believe that this blue color in Peitova's synagogue comes from this Assyrian idea of using lapis lazuli. And as we know, there are many Egyptian motifs, other Egyptian motifs, and still there is a Moorish-styled Torah ark, and the platform in front of it, probably it pays a tribute to the previous period when Moorish-styled synagogues were favored. And of course there is this famous inscription above the Torah ark, which was made after the Holocaust: "Blessed be the Lord, who hath not given us as a prey to their teeth," meaning the Nazis' teeth, which is a verse from Psalm 124. And the skylight is very interesting because it has these 12 precious stones, which are described as a breastplate in Exodus, as the breastplate of Aaron. But it should be square, and the stones should be placed in 4 rows of 3. But the designers, the architects, felt pretty free to make a design appropriate for these proportions, and they were novators. And actually this admixture of Art Nouveau, of modern style, still modern, is also something that says that they intended to produce a modernized space. And here is a long quotation from Max Michelson, the grandson of the founder, who explains in his memoirs what I have told you previously. So I don't think that we have recalled my conclusions, but I should tell that this line of Jewish Hebrew national romanticist architecture had a continuation in the land of Israel. This is the design and building of the Hebrew gymnasium in Tel Aviv, which uses the same iconography of Chipier and Perrault, and this trend in Jewish architecture already in in Palestine, in land of Israel, it continued until the middle of the 1920s, when it was rejected for many reasons, mainly for the need of mass construction and arrival of Bauhaus students who wanted to build on large scale and something convenient without much decoration. And the fate of this building is such that it was razed in around 1960, and now it is only an emblem of the Israeli Society for Protection Monuments. And the last chapter in our book is Synagogue Architecture of Latvia between archaeology and eschatology. You know that in 1901, an American architect, Arnold Brunner, designed this synagogue in Philadelphia, modeling it on the recently discovered ancient synagogues in the land of Israel, in Galilee. So he took as a pattern several photographs. He personally wrote something in his Jewish encyclopedia published in New York, and he was very, very inventive, and he wanted to say, and he wrote, he published, that now with the discovery of ancient synagogue, which were classicists, not neoclassicists, but classicists, what could be the Jewish architecture if Romans didn't borrow it from natural development? We don't know whether the Jews took it from Greeks or the Greeks took it from Jews. There was such a theory also, but anyway, it is a valid Jewish architecture. And we should continue with this line. It was also suitable to neoclassicism in America with its new imperialism and so on. So he designed several synagogues in neoclassicist style. And these archaeological discoveries, they became increasingly popular through prints, through the postcards, and through books. And these are the reconstructions of the ancient synagogues in Galilee, like Kfar Baram and others, at Dike, and so on, which became very, very popular, particularly in the German reading part of the world. Capernaum, you know, this synagogue exists, but this is a reconstruction. And also in more popular publications. So, when it comes to the design of new synagogues in the late 1920s, before the crisis, Paul Mandelstam uses this iconography to design the synagogue in Bulgari. Two versions of it, in brick and in stone. Finally, that synagogue was not built in the late 20s because the crisis started, economic crisis, but it was also built not in Maieri, but not in Bulgari, but in Maieri, in Victoria Street. And this is our measure drawing. We have discovered that the front portion of the synagogue was built of brick, and the rear part, the prayer hall, is built of wood. That is two versions, two options were combined. And this is the publication of the facade of this new built synagogue. And what we can see here, we can see here very typical elements of these ancient synagogues discovered in the land of Israel, like the central porch and the side entrances. We know such entrances also in early churches like in Gerasa, in Jerash, in Jordan, and elsewhere in the Near East. But also we can see here a broadened front with so-called shoulders of a lion. This comes from Jewish thought, from a novel reconstruction of the Herodian temple with these additions of chambers for eyes on the southern and the northern side of the sanctuary. It's an idea that is circulating in synagogue architecture since the 18th century. And definitely these reconstructions, graphical reconstructions of the ancient synagogues. At the same time, a synagogue was designed and built in Vulduri, and it also repeats that scheme of ancient synagogues in many points, particularly in its front facade with a central arched entrance with this low gable, which is not for Latvian climate, but rather for the Middle Eastern climate, some feeling of the south, and these two entrances on the sides of the central porch. So this is the scheme. And another synagogue is the Hasidic Lois in Bauska, another in this series, which was first designed as a dwelling house. I couldn't understand how it could fit function of a synagogue, because, for instance, the bathrooms are placed above the prayer room and so on. And as built, it also repeats the same motives of the Mediterranean, of Galilean, of Eretz Israeli synagogues, though the motifs are strongly simplified, but we can see the shoulders of the central entrance, of some rosettes that were strongly simplified, and this is the main entrance. But unfortunately now it is stripped of any decorative element, but still exists, still standing there in Bauska. So I will not read the conclusions, but what I would like to say that recently we thought that the synagogue architecture of Latvia is a turned page. It is something that belongs only to the past. But happily, fortunately, in the last decades we see the reconstruction of synagogues in Ludza and Rezekne, also fabulous reconstruction of the synagogue in the Peter Street, and also there's a new synagogue in Jurmala, but unfortunately there is no reconstruction of that work by Mandelstam, but we can discern a public interest in synagogue architecture. And that's why I feel it is very important to speak about it, to explain what it is from the Jewish point of view, and what does it mean for the history of synagogue architecture, which is not necessarily focused on Latvia. It has its own geography and its own chronology, and it's very important not to close the perspective on local styles, on local histories, though the local architects are very, very important. They are actually those who implemented those ideas, but for instance, like Jewish national romanticism, which is explicit in the Peter Shul, is different than other national romanticism. Here, I mean the Baltic people's romanticism, Latvians, Lithuanians, Finns, it has its own sources and own continuation. And in the book I'm speaking more about these chains linking particular synagogues, and with many links missing, to produce a larger narrative and to share it and to discuss it. Thank you very much for your attention.
So now we're open to questions. I understand that it was a long lecture, but I hope you will use this unique possibility Questions can be asked also in Latin, I translate in Russian or in English. Or in Polish, or in German, or in many other languages that he speaks, but
Ukrainian.
Ukrainian. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Thank you very much for the lecture. I missed the beginning. I have a question. Do you have any ideas or have you examined the synagogues from the agricultural sources? Because it's pretty hard to find any pictures and it's nearly nothing.
The cruise skills is difficult, but
Can you speak?
sorry. Jacobus, it's pretty simple building. It's neoclassicist in its base, like the soldiers' synagogue, let's say, but it is reconstructed to such an extent that you cannot discern anything and you cannot come in, and there are no historical images to speculate, to discuss anything. That's a pity. I'm sorry, it's not in the main part of the story for sure. Maybe if something will be discovered, we'll introduce it.
Yeah, I found information that there were 5 synagogues in Egerstadt.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yes, so I mean, the only photos for these synagogues we have are from 1939, which is after they have suffered during the First World War. So they're pretty simple, and their design is not, so as this very much is a book about new ideas, so their design is anything but new. So it's very much following the design of other synagogues that Sergei talks about. So what maybe you did not mention is that the book, so what was presented was kind of conceptual part of the book, but the book will have also an appendix as a catalog of other synagogues, which obviously will refer to them, but there is not much what we can tell the ideas behind the construction of these synagogues. So I think what is very much about the synagogues that we mentioned, we understand what were the guiding lines and guiding motivation for the people who commissioned synagogues and who built synagogues. While for Jacobus, for example, we have no idea, no sources concerning that, and so we can just look at the photos and say what style they belong to, but we have no background for that. Probably.
Thank you for adding. There will be a catalog of 37 preserved synagogues.
So that's the same with the rest of them too, because I know there were several synagogues.
Yes, sure, yes.
Yeah, there were 11 synagogues. In the rest of them, one survives, and so some of them will be, for example, you've seen the Green synagogues. Many of them were very similar to it. So again, this kind of context going under one chapter.
It's also impossible to say they were all the same, and it's a problem of writing such a book. I would love to produce a grassroots book, studying from town to town and coming to some synthesis. It's simply impossible within my lifespan and within the preserved synagogues. Yes.
What was the function of two synagogues standing side by side, like in yellow? Were they used in 2 different seasons, like cold and warm, or were they used by 2 different congregations?
No, they were for the same congregation, but one was cold without heating, the larger one, and it could be used, and certainly was used on high holidays when every Jew comes to synagogue on Yom Kippur to listen to Kol Nidrei prayer and so on, and there is no choice. There is one great synagogue, and the Jews prefer to be together. But on other occasions, they use this new synagogue, so-called new Moorish-style synagogue, which was much smaller, though much more exposed. For some reason, there is a mixture of these in the present historiography, let's say. But also in Kuldiga, there are two synagogues, one by another one I have shown you, and another is pretty neoclassicist, which is combined with mikveh, with a ritual bath. And people remember, as Ilya told us, that women were attending that building because there was a mikveh, there was a women's bath. And they call it women's synagogue, but it wasn't women's synagogue. It was Bet Midrash. It was a house of study where they had a library. They could remain after the hours of prayer, unlike in great synagogue, and spend the entire day if they didn't want to work or be with their families. So it's also very typical. Was typical.
Yeah. We come back for synagogue in Europe. I think this is a small mistakes where synagogue was not Bulgari, Dubulti.
Dubulti? No,
Yeah.
Dubulti is Chereny Street. No?
Chereny,
Yeah. Maybe yes. Yes. Sure. Yes.
The facade is
Yeah.
from
Chereny Street.
Yeah.
Sure. If I've been mistaken, no. Of course. It was designed as a canteen, but probably the caption was wrong. Sure. Then it was a market, and now it is closed, not in use. Yes.
Good question.
Stabul synagogue, the synagogue on Stabul, the building looks like it has maintained that facade, or is it only constructed? It looks like the facade seems to be
You know that there is one pre-war photograph, and we have to
We're waiting for it to be delivered.
to be printed.
Riga City Museum.
Yes, and it is not similar to the design. It is remotely similar to the design, but we have to compare the present situation, present facade with the pre-war facade, and then we will know better whether it is preserved or not.
But inside, do you know?
Nothing.
But we know from a memoir that, well, it's not a memoir, it's actually a good colleague of ours, a member of the community. She lived in 1950s and early 1960s, just next door to this ruin of the synagogue, and she remembers that the synagogue's vault had depiction, was painted blue with stars. But there are no photos and no pre-war memoirs of people attending the synagogue. And surprisingly, that we know that even people who lived nearby in the 1930s, like our late colleague Mayor Smerlers, they attended synagogues in other neighborhoods because of whatever reason. So even the source who we could trust could not tell us anything about the synagogue. So that's the problem, and we sometimes have very strange sources concerning the synagogues. For example, the synagogue in Bulduri, the only mention outside of the context of construction of the synagogue is actually the story of destruction written by a British citizen who lived in Jurmala and who in the 1980s wrote her memoir. So surprisingly, we have such a strange source. So that's the problem. Concerning Stabul Street, this photo actually was discovered accidentally because there was an album of buildings constructed by architect Reinhold Schmeling, an album produced for 25th anniversary of his career, and that was presented to him. And that's how we know for sure that it was constructed by Schmeling, and there is a photo. And so we're now trying to get it in good quality. So, what we probably can say that this upper decorated element probably was not built, but we were waiting for the photographs and it indeed was constructed. Because otherwise the only photo of the synagogue is actually, we have there a photo of this group of people sitting where you can see just a small portion, corner of the synagogue and the wall of the courtyard. So again, it's very strange to have such a photo of the synagogue, but obviously people it's a dedication ceremony of the synagogue. For them, the architecture mattered much less than themselves sitting in nice suits. And
yes. Sure. Also, you know, when you publish something and you tell something to public, it brings some unexpected results sometimes. I've published an article on this interwar synagogues in Jurmala, and there was a small chapter about the Nikolaev's soldier, certain Menachem Mendel Lezhek, who settled in Jurmala. He lived all year long there, also in winter, and he built a synagogue, the first synagogue in Bulduri on his personal plot, on his own plot. And people used to pray there, and then it dilapidated and a new synagogue was constructed on that plot. But he left for the United States in 1920. And there are photographs of him and so on. He was a famous person. He was a shoemaker. And his son was continuing as an elder of the synagogue, as a gabbai, and he was killed. And it is in that memory of a Scottish woman that recalls how it was burnt and destroyed. But I've published that this Lezhek died in 20s or 30s. And somebody writes me from the United States, no, he was my grand-grandfather, he died in 21. It's not that important for the architectural history, but people connect things, and if they have some information, they used to send it. If you have something, some photographs, some knowledge, some memories, you're very welcome to give it to Iliad.